What's missing if we do purely bodybuilding style training?
Oh, we're just diving right into it. Okay. So purely bodybuilding style training is really great. It helps the structure become stronger. It'll help build tendon strength, bone density. But most of the movements are in the sagittal plane. Most of the movements are very linear. Most of the movements are isolated. And isolation isn't inherently bad. But isolation without the ability of involving the whole body in fluid movement, I think is, in the long term, or even in the short term, kind of going to be an issue. Because when a lifter or when somebody gets into bodybuilding, bodybuilding is awesome. The pump is amazing. Building muscle feels great. And after every session, you feel accomplished. You tend to focus in on that though. And the idea that I have is that the way that you lift will be reflected over time in the way that you move. So when you see people begin to focus purely on hypertrophy, building muscle, isolating, linear, sagittal plane movements, the way they walk, the way they attempt to run, most people stop running, the way they sprint, all the rotational aspects that make these movements powerful and efficient slowly begin getting lost. So if you're somebody who's bodybuilding, it's probably a good idea to maintain practices that are going to feed into your fluid movement so that you can gain a level of hypertrophy without sacrificing too much movement ability.
Is there a way to integrate transverse plane type of movements and still get the bodybuilding growth that we want?
Absolutely. I think, you had Ben Patrick on the show. I think a lot of the stuff that Ben shows, even a lot of the stuff that Mike Israetel is big on full range of motion. So the thing is full range of motions with movements is great. But I think that specifically when it comes to weight training, it would be a great idea to explore different aspects of movements with the movements that you already do. I would say, though, that when you do these things, you should probably lower the weight. Because let's give an example of in implementing some deep spinal flexion with a good morning, which inherently would just be a Jefferson curl. You might be able to good morning 135 or 150 or 185 pounds, but you might only do a Jefferson curl with 225 dumbbells initially, 25-pound dumbbells, right? To bring in a level of spinal articulation, deep spinal flexion, so that you maintain that ability. Because with the way that most people lift, right, the spine is typically in a neutral position because in terms of having strong skeletal leverage, the spine being in a neutral position is going to be the strongest position. So inherently, when you're trying to push the most amount of weight possible on a squat, a good morning, deadlift, you're going to maintain that neutral spine. You're going to push the load. Now, though, when you're implementing and you're adding in spinal flexion, some lateral flexion, some extension, you can do these things with your loads. You can actually even also induce hypertrophy around the spine with these things, but you need to decrease the load you're using. And I think on the side of things, the fundamental concept that I think is missing with the way that we train as lifters is understanding how to breathe while moving load through space. This is a totally different idea than what's typically taught, but I think that's fundamental. I think that's what we should learn how to do before we keep increasing load that we work with in the gym.
That's a fantastic clarification about the sacrifice that you have to make if you want to increase range of motion. You can't suddenly increase the weight as heavy as you possibly can, because by virtue of doing so, you find ways to make the exercise more mechanically efficient. You'll do things with range of motion, speed, in order to lift the most amount of weight. Whereas if the goal is to start integrating movement into your training, by decreasing it, it allows your body the ability to articulate the spine, where otherwise you'd be restricted if you're just trying to hoist as heavy weights as possible.
Yes. And, I think that we need to look at the metrics of progression a little bit differently. First off, I think we need to give ourselves longer time horizons to make progression in the gym. Because what happens, and I've been in this trap too, because I was a pro natural bodybuilder. I got an elite powerlifting total. I love lifting. Okay. I love lifting weights. But when you love lifting weights, you fall into the trap of the typical progressive overload progression, which is You did this weight this week. Next week, you might be able to increase by 2.5 pounds and or maybe increase the weight that you're moving. And you're going to be doing that over time, or you're going to be trying to attempt to do that over time. But the thing is when your only metric of progression is lifting more load, you end up doing stupid things to lift more load. And that can end up becoming very unsafe for the lifter, because you end up working with weights that you're not ready for and are actually very irresponsible, and you tweak something. Then you have to backstep a little bit and you have to keep progressing. But I'm going to rewind back to the breathing thing that I mentioned, because this, I think, this is the way that I look at progressive overload. Let me just put it this way. And it's a little bit different from most people. When you're lifting heavier weights, you're typically taught to brace the spine using the Valsalva mover. So like brace your core, keep it braced, rib cage over hips, like 2 cups pouring into each other, right? Then fill that up. So now you're braced. You breathe into the diaphragm so that you're braced, lift the load. Okay. So that you can, especially when you're lifting heavy loads, so that you can lift the heaviest load possible. Now, I'm a grappler. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 9 years. And within that sport, holding your breath is death, no matter what situation. There's never going to be a place in grappling or in any martial art where breath holds work. Along with that, if you look at another martial art like boxing, when the fighter throws a punch, you hear this, you hear that happen. That's an exhalation, right? They exhale when they throw a punch. And that exhale isn't happening with them thinking about exhaling. It happens because when you create force, and actually, if you do this with me, and if anyone listening, if you guys do this, if you were to growl and you go, right? If you grunt and let air out, let me ask you this. Try it real quick, and what do you feel? Just try it and let me know what you feel.
I feel I'm getting that same type of contraction, but I'm also breathing out.
That's okay. So see, this is thing now. Now, when I'm producing force, and this is when I lift, like there's sandbag lifts that I have on my Instagram that I post. And when I post these lifting, people hear me making sounds. And when I'm lifting something, when I'm producing force and lifting an object, a row, a bicep curl, I'm exhaling to brace. I'm not holding my breath ever to brace. Even as the load gets heavier, I'm exhaling when I'm coming from the bottom of a squat to brace, not holding my breath to do it. For example, when I'm coming down in a squat, I'm actually going to slowly inhale. And then when I'm producing force out of the hole, exhale. When I pick up a sandbag, when I'm coming up with that bag, I'm going to exhale the whole time while I'm creating force, because that breath braces the spine. Now, for me, my metric to understand if I should keep progressing is if I can breathe while moving the weight. If I cannot breathe, if I find that I'm having to hold my breath, I can lift a 300-pound sandbag, but I cannot lift it while breathing yet. So I know that if I'm going to lift this the way I want to, which is being able to forcefully use my breath to help me create force, I need to back off, build with the 150, the 200, the 225, the 250, get those smooth so I can breathe and move the load. And then soon I'll be able to just mog that 300 without having to hold my breath while doing it.
That's simple but game-changing advice, because you're getting essentially the best of both worlds. You're getting the stabilization of the spine, but that extra degree of movement to be able to articulate and, get those extra benefits of moving your body beyond just pure Valsalva maneuver, 1RM, rigidity. That's just to maximize how much you can lift. You're able to maybe not lift as much extreme weight, but damn, you're pretty close, and you've still got that articulation and breathing happening. That's awesome.
And this is the thing, I'm not going to demonize the Valsalva, because if you're going to put 500, 400, 500, 600 pounds on your back,
yeah, you got to do what you got to do. Yeah.
You got to do what you got to do. Now, let me put it this way. If I want to build back to doing those weights, I personally, I'm going to do it in the way that I just mentioned. It's going to take a little bit longer, because I would probably have the ability to lift those types of loads right now while holding my breath. Maybe. But the thing is that won't feed into helping me move better. What I'm trying to do, and these are my personal goals. My personal goals is global movement fluidity in everything that I do. Because as a grappler, I need the best grapplers, the best movers. That's why I'm very happy that 9 years ago, I chose to get into the sport of jiu-jitsu. Because if you want to become a better grappler, it's not just becoming stronger. It's becoming an efficient mover, learning technique, but you gotta be a good mover. You can't be you can't be having lower back pain and lack spinal articulation if you want to become a top level grappler. You have to have freedom in all aspects of movement. So inherently, with that being my goal as a grappler, I realized that I need to bring that idea into the way that I move and the way that I move in the gym. And for anybody, I think one other thing to think about here is this. I'm going to speak for myself. Any of the times that I've potentially injured myself with lifting have been the times where I was holding my breath and lifting something that sometimes actually, I've tweaked my back lifting 315, but again, it was holding the breath, because there's something that happens when you hold your breath. It's a sympathetic response, right? We have parasympathetic, which is rest and relax. You're calm, you're breathing into the diaphragm, everything's good. You have sympathetic response. Oh shit. You see something that shocks you, you hold your breath, you tighten up and your body's like, what the fuck, right? So now when we're lifting and we have constantly the habit of we're gonna lift something heavy, we're stressing, we're in this state of a lot of sympathetic tone when lifting. Whereas I think that if you can use the breath as your metric for progressive overload, and the thing that this is going to cause, it's going to cause you to lower the weight and learn how to breathe while lifting. You're going to have to back off. Loads that you used to lift, you're not going to be ready for yet. It's going to be laughably light and laughably low, but you're teaching yourself a new ability. And to get better at that, it's just another way to progress. So instead now of having to hold your breath when lifting these heavy loads, you're going to slowly progress yourself to being able to breathe while lifting. And the thing that I found for myself is like, I don't feel nearly as physically stressed after each session. And the people that like I've shown this to, they start implementing it and they're like, I feel calmer. I feel more recovered. I feel like I can do more the next day, because inherently when you're breathing, when moving and breathing, when lifting, you have more sympathetic, more parasympathetic tone. Whereas when you're always holding your breath and lifting, you have more sympathetic tone, and inherently you're stressing your system out more.
We need to think where we spend the majority of our time. It's training. It's not performing at our peak. It's not competing in a competition every single time we go to a workout. So our regular training should reflect that. And I love this as a self-limiting approach for those of us, we all that are listening to a podcast on fitness absolutely adore this stuff. We're obsessed, we're passionate, but that can be to our own detriment. So if you want to limit yourself from getting injured, mitigate that, potential pain and injury, this breathing during exercise seems like the number one way to essentially be your own coach at all times. Oh no, I want to go for a lift that I have to do a massive Valsalva maneuver, hold my breath. Maybe I should not do that today. Maybe I should just stick to the patient approach, because at the end of the day, what's the rush? We're going to be lifting until the day we die. So we don't want to get burnt out. We don't want to get injured. We want to stay in the game long term. And I think that this breathing approach to exercise is a great frame of reference.
Mm-hmm. A few things. First off, yes, we are going to be doing this forever. Now, for the athlete that is a focused lifter, let's say you are an Olympic lifter athlete and you're trying to lift the heaviest weights possible. You have these goals. You're a power lifter. You're trying to SBD as heavy as possible. You have these specific goals. I'm not going to tell you not to go towards your goals and totally change your lifting approach and do what I do. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying, just kind of like what you mentioned right there, experiment with it. Okay. Maybe on your, on another day, on a day of training, that's like a lighter day, or just a day that you're not going as hard, experiment with that. Maybe lighten the loads a little bit on some of your movements and learn how to do that. And one thing that I think we got to realize, this is something that I learned, and I've known this, but it really showed itself when I met Mark Bell I actually met him in 2014, but the first time I stepped into the Super Training Gym was in 2015. And when I stepped into the Super Training gym, you know, I think at the time I was maybe deadlifting. I had a deadlift PR of 620, 615 or 620, right? Sumo deadlift, so it really doesn't count. But that was my PR, okay? Now, I came into the gym and all the other guys were like stronger than me. They knew more about powerlifting than me. And I knew that, ooh, I'm a little fish. This is a good place to be. It's great to be the little fish in the pond because you got room to grow. So I was like, hey, Mark, and this at the time, you know, his name was Marcus. He went by Filipino Thunder. He had a beautiful deadlift. I think he deadlifted up to 800 something pounds. I was like, can you guys look at my deadlift and tell me what I need to fix? So, you know, they looked at my deadlift. And they're like, you know, okay, this is some aspects of your technique you need to fix. So I did what they told me and I was weaker. And I was like, what? But I was like, you know what? If you want to get stronger, you listen to the people that have a bit more knowledge than you. You do what they tell you to do. You back off the load. You don't lift as heavy and you implement that technique and see what you learn. 2 months later, I deadlifted 715 for the first time and it was easy. I had a 90-pound PR because I gave myself the time to adapt to a new technique, to grain it into my nervous system so I could learn how to do it without thinking, and boom, I lift heavier. Wow. I'm telling you that story because inherently, I think when we hear new ideas, we have this knee-jerk reaction to be like, that's not what I do. I don't like what they're telling me. It's not my thing. So it's bullshit. And I've done this before in the past too. But we might be stepping over something that could really allow us to reach a new level if we're a little bit open to trying new things.
Seems as if your transformation has allowed you to have the humility to assess where you want to improve, where your weaknesses are. And that's also made you dabble in the world of functional training is the term we could loosely put towards this.
Yeah.
What are the misconceptions about functional training that people have as misbeliefs that you believe?
I think one big thing is that you can't build tissue. You can't induce hypertrophy and I think when we think about building muscle, I think one thing we should back off from is trying to optimize how much muscle we build in a certain period of time. I don't think I think it's beneficial to understand principles when it comes to typical resistance training in the gym. And Jeff Nippert does a great job of this. Mike Israetel does a great job of this, of telling people the most ideal motions to do something. But if we back even further, what induces hypertrophy? Mechanical stress on a said tissue. You stress a certain tissue out enough, you bring it close to failure, you're going to be able to induce some hypertrophy. Whether you're curling like this or whether you're curling at an angle like this, whether it's a non-ideal, not great angle like this, whether it's your whole body using a little, if you get that tissue, right, that area to close to failure and induce enough stress, you're going to get hypertrophy, right? So I think that when we look at some of these, the functional movements, you can still hit these tissues. You can still hit these muscles with a kettlebell. You can still do some of these things with a sandbag. You could still do some of these things with some of these different implements. But you could potentially include other areas into the movement. And I get it. That means that potentially you're not loading that specific tissue as much. But at the end of the day, if you can still bring a level of fatigue to that tissue, you're going to induce hypertrophy, but now the whole system is involved with the movement.
And I think the argument there is the fact that it's not optimal. It always comes back to this optimal. Yeah, we agree. We've never said that a functional movement that trains the same muscle and like movement pattern is superior because there's more skill, there's more movement variability. You will still build muscle if you're training close to failure with a minimum of, say, 5 reps is the consensus. Mm-hmm. But if you were super concerned about wanting to optimize that hypertrophy, maybe you sprinkle in a little bit of extra homework for that area with a machine where there's zero skill component, minimal fatigue, and you're getting the best of both worlds. Granted, you're not going to look like a bodybuilder at the peak level because everything they do is optimized. But for 95% of people listening, we want to have some strength. We want to have some mobility. We want to have muscle mass. And you don't need to sacrifice everything in order to get bits of everything.
Exactly. I think the biggest important thing there is figure out your goals. If you do want to look like the bodybuilder at the most elite level, okay. But I think a way that you might want to add a different perspective is, how do you want to move? Ask yourself that question. Really ask yourself that question, because ideally we're going to be in this life for a long time. And if for a small period of time we're training in the gym, but for everything else in life, we're going to be walking. Ideally, we want to be able to do active things. Ideally, we want to be able to jump. We want to be able to sprint. We want to be able to have these abilities. Just think about this. Is your training going to allow you to do those things without stress? In my mind, when I look at these things, I have a goal of no inhibition. I don't want any movement inhibition with the physical things that I'm going to be doing in life. If I got to take a sprint across the parking lot, I want to be able to do that without, stress or scare of hurting myself. If I want to hop up and grab something, or I want to just skip or jump, I want to be able to do those things without thinking about it. I don't want to have to prepare myself to then hop. I don't want to, because for me, even in the past, I just wouldn't hop. I wouldn't jump because it hurt. And that's, I think, thinking about that, then we can all navigate our training and be like, okay, you know what? I do want to gain muscle, but I also want good spinal rotation because I want to be able to run and sprint. And I potentially want to do a martial art. And that's more important in martial art than just being big and having a lot of muscles. And the thing is, again, going back to what you mentioned, Daniel, this is a long game. We don't need to be focused on, in the next 20 weeks, I'm going to build this much muscle, or this year. Like, let's expand our time horizons, because again, we're human beings. We're going to be doing this for a long time. Fitness isn't going to be just the next 2 years, the next 3 years. Fitness is for life. At 60, 70, 80, we still want to be doing this stuff. But if you give yourself a long enough time, you can then organize your training and still potentially get your muscle goals, but you'll also be able to get your movement goals, and you won't have to sacrifice things. Now, the muscle might take a little bit longer to build. It will build, but the movement's also going to be there. And I personally think when it comes to structuring your physical practice, for me personally, that's more fun.
Where functional training gets a bad rap is there's a spectrum of functionalness where we've all been on social media. We've seen the extreme. We're talking single leg Bosu ball squats while jumping on it. We've seen overhead press with a barbell with bands and different weight kettlebells attached to each side. Yeah. Functional training could just be something as simple as doing a stable pistol squat with a hand assist, or it could be a handstand push-up against a wall. I'd argue that stuff is still functional because it's moving your body, but it's stable enough to elicit a hypertrophic response and build strength.
Let me ask you a question. What's picking up something off the ground?
Squat, deadlift.
It's a deadlift. These are functional movements. Unfortunately, within this sphere of physical culture, we look at strength training as potentially not being functional because we segmented training, right? All this training in terms of lifting things, a deadlift, it's a nice handle and it's whatever, but with a barbell deadlift can be a functional movement. So can picking a sandbag off the ground. So can picking a kettlebell or a dumbbell off the ground. Picture somebody who's like older and has never lifted, but now they have the ability to pick up a 40-pound dumbbell, a 50-pound kettlebell, a 40, 50-pound sandbag. That is functional, right? But the problem lies when we go too deep into one realm of physical practice, because we become very proficient at lifting these types of loads, but we lose our efficiency in terms of moving in other ways because we're so focused on this. We're so focused on the building strength in the gym and size, etc. All these things are functional, right? It's just making sure that within your practice, you have other things that are going to allow you to develop these other physical capacities. Because you could be developing all the neutral spine, rigidity, etc. in the gym, but if you have other practices that allow you, or even in the gym, if you have other practices that allow you to work on that spinal articulation, that allow you to work on movement fluidity for the whole body, meaning from the feet, rotating contralateral movement of the spine, all of this stuff together, you can have both worlds, right? Training. It's just the nature of how we have it right now. We have functional training and we have traditional strength training, but it's all training. It is all good. But when you go too deep down one end, you end up with potential weaknesses that the other side might have some answers for.
It seems as if belonging to a community and having an identity in a form of fitness is the biggest contributing factor as to why people don't experiment with the potential of what their body can become.
I would have been stuck in that trap if I didn't stop focusing on powerlifting and start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I cannot say that I'd be in a different boat because, I grew up playing soccer. I played from 6 to 20. I had a foot surgery and I had to stop. But I've been lifting since I was 13, and lifting not to bodybuild, but lifting more so to be better on the soccer field. Although I did a lot of bodybuilding stuff and some calisthenic stuff. But I found powerlifting after soccer, which I got focused on. I got an elite total too. I never benched 405. I think I benched like 390 something. In the meet, I benched 620, deadlifted 755. And I had goals after that powerlifting meet. But fortunately, I decided after that meet, I was like, I want to try some jiu-jitsu too, along with this powerlifting stuff. And as I started jiu-jitsu, and guys that were half my size, that were 160 pounds, were tapping me right and left, even though I was so physically strong, I was getting beat up by men and some women that were smaller than me, which made me realize I need to adjust things, because obviously this structure and this movement ability that I currently have is not helping me in this. So as I just continue to develop at martial arts, and thankfully, as I've been open to learning from all of the different professionals we've had on this podcast, I've been able to just evolve my personal practice into being something that can allow me to get all that I'm personally looking for, but while also not really I have weaknesses, but I find the things to plug my weaknesses so that I have global ability. I have global ability of movement. I have global ability of strength. I have global ability of just the ability to do all the things that I want to do as a human, what I want to do as a fighter, and what I want to do as a strength athlete. But if I was I'm a power lifter, and if I kept going down the road of I'm a power lifter, I don't know if I would have been open to doing as many of these things, because obviously my focus is powerlifting. What are the best powerlifters in the world doing? The best powerlifters in the world are doing their accessory movements, squat, bench, deadlift, and outside of that, they're eating and sleeping. They're not running. They're not doing anything outside of that because they want that. But then you look down the line, and something that I've paid attention to, deep attention to, as I've been doing this show with Mark, is how do these people operate when in their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s? I always pay attention to the long game. And this is maybe something we just have to see how I'm doing in 30 years. But when I look at some of those people, they don't have what I want. They don't have the abilities I want to have when I'm older. They don't have the abilities I want to have now. So that's why I think if you're an athlete in any of these sports, it is on you, and it is your responsibility to learn and develop physical things within your practice to make sure that as you're getting better at your specific sport, you're also continuing to improve at your movement as a human being. Because at the end of the day, you are human first, most of the time, athlete second with your sport. And again, for me personally, it's all these other capacities that allow for a joyful life that I seek, along with wanting to be good at my sport. I'll say this one more time. I hate going on long tangents, but I have this somewhat delusional mindset about progress. I believe, and I have this right here. It's the word limit, and it's lined out. I got this tattooed on my hand years ago. I'm Nigerian, by the way, and tattoos are looked down upon within our culture. We do not get tattoos. We don't do it. But the reason I actually got this was because of my mom, and she hates that I say this. she always told me since I was a kid, she heard the saying here in the United States that the sky's the limit. And when the first time she heard that said, and I said that, she's like, that's stupid. Why would you ever put a limit on something you can do? So she said the sky's not the limit. Inherently, from a very young age, I've just had this idea and this personal belief that I'm not going to put limitations on the things that I can do and learn and achieve. So as an athlete, you typically see, I'm 32. In grappling, 32 is kind of old, and you usually see most people in their 30s, that's when they start dwindling down. When I was in my 20s, I always saw my 30-year-old friends. They were like, oh, you're going to get back pain. Oh, just wait. When you're in your 30s, you ain't going to be running or sprinting or this
That
stuff.
recovery is not the same as it was when I was 16.
Right? When I was in my 20s, man, like I had some knee pain and back pain in my early 20s because of the practices I was doing. But, you know, I've always just been in the mindset of, I look at someone like LeBron James, and even though everyone's going to say he's a genetic anomaly, you look at the type of effort this man puts into taking care of his body, and he's still dominating the league at 40 or 41 years old. 40, actually, just turned 40. Dominating the league. Top 5 player right now, still. It's not just genetics. It's the choices that you are making each day that are having an effect on your physical output. And if you continue to make the same choices and you continue not to try to learn new things, you're going to have the same outcomes. That's just it.
And that's the real wisdom right there in Simo. And that's what I really think makes you a good ambassador and role model for people that would look up to you, is because you came to this realization without any major trauma, any catastrophic injury that made you be forced to look at this, like many lifters that are broken by the time they are 40. You thought to yourself, what is missing? What is a weakness of mine? What is going to fulfill me on this fitness journey? I'm not trying to be the pinnacle of powerlifting. I'm not trying to be the pinnacle of bodybuilding. What is of value to me? Moving well, having longevity. And you've just done the hard work to be able to look into what that entails. And more importantly, having the discipline to follow it through, because it's not easy, especially if you're known for doing something, you're comfortable doing it. We all become creatures of habit with our routine. When we try something new, there's often a internal pushback from ourselves. Oh, this is different. I'm not comfortable with this. I'll go back to what's familiar. But it's great that you've been able to push through that, and just sounds like you're just fulfilled with your training, which is something that we should all strive for.
2 things I need to remind myself. We got to talk about play, but the first thing we're going to talk about right now is that idea. You know, in 2015, actually, was it 2016 was the powerlifting meet. 2015 was the Worlds. 2015 was my last show as a bodybuilder. I did natural bodybuilding, still am natural, although people love to say things about that. But it was my last show as a natural bodybuilder. And I had a goal after that show because I got top 5 and I've got 5th place as a heavyweight pro natural bodybuilder at WNBF Worlds. That's when I started jiu-jitsu in December of 2015 after that show. But I had a goal and I was like, I'm going to come back. I'm going to win this show. That was my intent. Then as I started jiu-jitsu and I just understood that, wow, I suck at this, right? And a cool thing is you can go to my oldest YouTube channels and you can see some of my first classes of jiu-jitsu. I like showing when I start something, because when you become proficient at things, one thing I realize is when you become really proficient at something and people don't see how it happened, they don't think it's possible for themselves. So
genetics, you were already good at it when you began, etc.
That's why, like, you know, I started lifting at 13 and YouTube wasn't around 19 years ago. So people weren't able to see all the work I put in. They just saw me on a natural pro bodybuilding stage as one of my first videos, right? Or getting ready for a pro natural show, but they didn't see the 9 years of strength training and training that happened before I stepped on the pro natural bodybuilding stage, right? But I played out in my head as I was progressing at jiu-jitsu, and I still had these goals of bodybuilding and powerlifting in the back of my head. I played out, what does it entail to try to reach the top of this? With bodybuilding, it's just lifting more volume, gaining more muscle, and doing that as much as you can every week until you do your next show. And if that's your goal, I don't want I don't want to make it sound like that's a bad goal. It's not a bad goal if that's something you truly feel deep inside, that's what you want to do. If that's what you want to do, freaking do it. Don't let anybody tell you not to. But as I really played that out, I realized that becoming the best natural bodybuilder in the world, just gaining more muscle, isn't fun. Honestly, for me, and maybe that just means I'm not built to be a competing bodybuilder. I still love lifting weights though. That's never gone away. I love lifting. I love the gym. I love strength. I love training. Training is something that has been a part of me, and it has got me when I discovered training in the gym when I was 13, it got me out of depression. That's when I had a surgery, or I had Auschwitz-Slaughter, and I couldn't play soccer for a few years. That's when I found training. And in the interim, when I wasn't able to play soccer for the few months before I found training, I changed as a human being. I wasn't talking to friends. I wasn't doing well in school. I just shifted because I didn't have a physical outlet anymore. But when my mom got me in that gym, I started just looking at people and doing what they were doing. And I got on some forums and I kind of learned how to lift. I became Nsima again. So training is what I love. Movement is what I love, not being a bodybuilder. And I played out the powerlifter thing too. What's more with powerlifting? I squat more, I deadlift more, I bench more. What's that going to give me? It's not going to give me much, you know? So I think one thing we should do is we should play out our goals. If in our heart we want to become a super strong powerlifter or a super jack bodybuilder or super strong at Olympic lifting, that's what we want to do it, right? But you know, just really think of those outcomes, because sometimes the goals that you may have might be dictated off of the expectations that you might be dealing with from other people. You know, it's an impressive thing. You know that if people see that you're killing it in bodybuilding, it's impressive, or they see that you're killing it in powerlifting, people will think it's impressive. But is that for you? You got to ask yourself that. All right, and then I realized that wasn't for me. But jiu-jitsu, I truly have a goal of becoming a black belt world champion. And I'm going to have failures along the way. But the thing is that goal's in my heart, and that goal's been on my heart since I was a white belt. I've known it. If it wasn't for anybody else, it's because I have this aspect of me that is a competitor. That's just, I have that outlet. But luckily, this martial art is a martial art that's dictated on being a good mover. So the things I love are able to be intertwined with each other in a very natural way. So it makes sense that I'm just going to go towards it because it's for me and not anybody else.
Fun is the most underrated part of this whole thing. It's just seems as if we're all trying to be the best competitive athlete in the world, but we're not even competing. We're just training to improve the quality of our life. And we just need to reframe our perspective on how we approach this stuff, because if you want to have muscle, have some strength with lifting weights and also your body weight, you want to have some good mobility by being able to get into different positions and have full range of motion in your movements. The more things that you do, the more fun it's going to be. You've got so much novelty and variety of exercise, but it comes at the sacrifice of optimizing any one thing. It's both the magnitude of your progress. The more things you do, you can't make as much progress at one time, as well as the rate of progress will be slower. Once you can accept that, it becomes so much more enjoyable because you stop comparing yourself to your previous self who was dedicated to one thing. I'm only doing calisthenics, so I'm gonna get really good at calisthenics. But what happens if I wanna lift some weights as well? My calisthenics progress won't be as fast, but I'll be enjoying these different domains of fitness. And that was a real eye-opening, I guess, paradigm shift that I had when realizing I don't want to be one thing as well.
That's huge, because I think one thing we can think about too, like if anybody just thinks about their lifting routine, think about how many different ways can you do a squat and induce stress to the quads. You could do a normal squat. You could do a slant board squat deeper. You could do an ATG split squat. You could do a Bulgarian split squat. You could do a pistol squat. There are so many ways to squat.
Front squat, back squat, the safety bar squat, it just keeps going.
Right. And yes, if week by week you're not doing that same front squat in the same way, and maybe your progression on the front squat skill is going to be a little bit slower, but I think you'd be surprised at how much you can improve at something while doing something else. I found this to be the case. First off, when I programmed for powerlifters in the past and I was working with powerlifters and bodybuilders, there'd be times where like we would stop squatting and maybe we'd just add in some front squatting and another type of squat. Then they'd come back to their squat and they hit a PR. And they'd be like, whoa, I wasn't even squatting and I hit a PR. I was like, you're still doing some type of squat. I think that falls in line for all of this, because just because you're not doing a back squat doesn't mean you're not doing the squatting pattern. And developing skills with different squatting patterns, for example, let's say you've been just back squatting to tell. Now you're doing a front squat. It's more difficult. It's lighter, but you're loaded in a slightly different way with the weight in front of you. You're building different levels of stability. You come back to the back squat, you hit a PR. I haven't been back squatting. Why? Because that front squat was plugging up holes in your system that now made your squat become more efficient. Now maybe wonder what happens if you do some heavy kettlebell single leg squats or some heavy split squats and you progress that along with some other movements and come back to your squat. You might find that you can squat a lot of weight. Ben Patrick, who was in this gym, when the first time I think I met him was like 3 years back. I don't think he said that he never barbell deadlifts, but I think he deadlifted 450 something. First time. And he's like, yeah, I don't barbell deadlift, but look at all the things that Ben does. And then he can go barbell deadlift. So I think that kind of just speaks to what you can allow yourself to have in terms of variability. One of the reasons why most programs are set up in the fashion of like, these movements within 7 days, the same movements, these next training blocks, is number one, it's easy to program. It's easy to see progression from week to week, which will keep you, if you're someone who's motivated purely by load, that'll keep you happy because it's like, I can see progress. And it's, I think it's just kind of, I don't want to say it. It's kind of simple, right? You don't have to learn as many different movements. You don't have to learn as many different movement patterns. So even from a coaching perspective, it's easier to program things in that way. And I'm not saying this is bad either. I'm not saying this is bad, but it's like, if you add in a bit of variability, so like if you have A, B, and C options for a squat, A, B, and C options for a type of press, A, B, and C options for this, and you kind of just plug and play from week to week for what you're feeling and what you kind of want to do, that's going to be something that, like you said, gives you a level of novelty, still allows you to attack the same things and progress those functions, and still allows you to kind of make progress. And if you want to do the same thing for 3 weeks, you can. But now you have some variability and more fun in what you do. Now, for me, when I'm training now, I'll hit everything in a week, but I'll attack different types of movements. And one thing that I try to do is I try to find ranges that just feel really awkward. I'll try to squat with a sandbag with kind of like a split stance and kind of progress my knee over my toe and come back and come back up. I'll do these things because I'm trying to achieve a mastery over a load. In jiu-jitsu, I have to be able to move my body in so many different ways with another human being. Classical lifts are going to be good for helping me produce force into a barbell, etc. But if I can add a dynamic aspect to the way that I lift and still lift something heavy, so I start light, obviously, but I progress to something heavier. Now I have true mastery over this weight, and it's like a human, and it's fun. And I find weaknesses within my ranges of motion, right? That's just kind of how I look at things. But yeah, I might not be bringing as much hypertrophy to my quads in the shortest amount of time. But again, that's not my goal. And if that's your goal, maybe this isn't the way you think about it, you know?
The biggest mistake I've made with this whole thing is continuing to add on movements and not substituting movements. So on a push day, I'd be like, I've worked so hard on my dips, but I also want to start doing bench press. What does that push workout look like now? We've got overhead press, we've got bench press, and we've got dips. When you start adding too many things, you get fatigue, you get plateau city, you get frustrated. The moment, and this only happened, I'm almost ashamed to admit it, starting to be able to do this maybe a year ago, is being like, okay, just replace the movement. On your leg day, let's not do barbell squats. Let's go through a chapter of, God forbid, we're doing leg press for a while. We're not going to be insecure about the squat going down. And then, surprise, surprise, came back to it recently. It doesn't even feel like I've missed a step. First workout or so, it's a little bit, getting the technique down and whatnot, but I haven't dropped any weight compared to what I was doing before. If not, I've shored out some weaknesses that I couldn't tackle from a similar movement by not doing variety. So these days, I'd recommend for people, because I know they're going to not want to have that FOMO of losing their performance on an exercise. If you swap it for a like movement, you'll be okay. A barbell row for a cable row, a overhead press for a handstand push-up. You get the formula here. You have to let go in order to make progress.
Exactly. It kind of goes into what we were talking about the breath. You got to rewind a little bit. You got to lower the load. You got to back off a little bit so you can make long-term progress. It's the same thing here, because when it comes to the squat, right? Not everybody's posting things on social media, but when you look at social media and your feed's filled with people squatting heavy weights, like all you kind of think about, all that's in your mind is like squatting heavy weight, right? You don't see the benefit of the leg press or the Smith machine squat, God forbid. Like you don't
say that on this podcast. I got to censor that actually.
Hey, but that kind of thing has its advantages. It has an advantage for potentially specific hypertrophy of the quads and stability of that range of motion. It's still good to know how to squat. It's still good to know how to squat, right? So that's the thing. I think that brings in the long-term way of progressing while always enjoying what you're doing. I think, personally, I don't think training it can be physically tough, but it should still be enjoyable. Because if we enjoy the way that we're training and the movement practices we're doing, we're going to seek out doing it. We're not going to find ways to back out of it. When I hear some people talking about training and it's like, it's this hardcore mission. I'm going to the gym to
it's a badge of honor.
Yeah. It's like, I do this every day, 6 days a week. I have one rest day, and I'm sacrificing. I'm working. Like, you're choosing to go into this gym and live.
100%. Yeah.
This isn't a sacrifice. This isn't a difficult thing. You're doing it because part of you really does enjoy the outcomes. Now, if you hate the way you train, that's on you, because you don't have to hate the way you train. But I think that if we can all, again, your practice doesn't need to be like my practice, but if you can find ways to make training enjoyable, right, and add in elements that you like, it's going to be something you wake up, you're like, I get to train today. Not I have to, not I gotta go. I get to go train today. That's how it should be looked at, I think, generally.
Today's show sponsor is Fitness FAQs. Do you want to learn how to master calisthenics? Fitness FAQs has the best workout programs from beginner to advanced level. Use the coupon code podcast10 at checkout to save 10% off when shopping at fitnessfaqs.com. On that topic of fun, what are your favorite unconventional exercises that you've been obsessed about?
Yeah, man. There's been a lot. Sandbag is, I think, why we talked about that. But man, I see these comments of people saying, are you getting ready to work as an Amazon truck driver or like at an airport throwing bags? And I'm like, hey, the sandbag is a beautiful piece of equipment because oddly enough, it is kind of like just labor. It doesn't have a nice handle like a barbell or a dumbbell where you can just nicely have it. The weight is dispersed evenly in your hand and it's easy to lift. You have to use your hand around this object that's oddly centered. You have to then find a way to get it up, to get it to your shoulder, to throw it over you. And as I've been progressing with the sandbag, I have found just so many different levels of strength that have been opening up. Let's start with my hands. Because it's this odd object that my hands have to now be used to like hoist up, my hands and wrist and grip have been getting stronger. My core, because of the awkward way that it can be lifted. Obviously, you can lift a sandbag in the most efficient strongman way where you lift and get under it. But my intent when I'm lifting a sandbag is to have the ability to lift it in all the ways possible. So there's a recent video I posted, and I I hoisted a 200-pound bag. I got it up and then just got it over my shoulder quickly. And when people saw that, they're like, are you going to hurt your lower back? Is your lower back okay there? It's like, but the thing is like, I can lift it in the way where I squat underneath it like a strong man, but I also want the ability to almost treat it kind of like a triple extension Olympic lift where I can just quickly pop, pop, get it over. And the thing is I didn't start with the 200 bag by doing that. I started with a lighter 100-pound bag. And my goal when lifting this bag was just to mog it. Again, uninhibited movement is my goal. So I wanted to look at that 100-pound bag and just be able to just throw it easily. So initially it was a little bit awkward. The breath helped me to be able to do that without any type of inhibition. Then I was able to do that with 125. Then I was able to do that with 150. And the other day, that was the first time I lifted the 200 like that under a level of fatigue. But it felt amazing, right? So the core strength, the awkward loading, like one movement that I've fallen in love with too, is the shoulder sandbag squat, where you have a sandbag on one shoulder, but now you're squatting down. Because I noticed that
asymmetrical loading, you're getting that different side of the core. Yeah, that'd be wild.
Yes, exactly. Like it's not like the perfect axial load that a barbell has. You know, I heard my friend, the barefoot sprinter, he mentioned this and I was like, dude, that's a perfect way of explaining it. He said that he was like, you know, man, when I work with a sandbag, I find that I have to brace more intelligently. And I was like, dude, that's it. That's what we're feeling as we're progressing with this. It's you're not just with the barbell, like we mentioned, Valsalva, tight. That there's no, but with the sandbag, if it's on one side, when you're going down, there's different levels of activation that are happening on both sides of the body. When it's here and you're hoisting, there's a different level of activation that's happening.
The intricacies of just being slightly more lateral or slightly lower on your body, it's almost a different stimulus every time you use the exact same weight.
Yes. And that goes into the idea of I'm trying to lift the sandbag in different ways. Because when I'm grappling, everybody that I roll with in every different scenario, even if it's the same person, it's different. They move differently. I have to lay pressure in differently. I have to handle their pressure differently. I have to be intelligent in the way I'm moving around their opponent and the way I'm handling them. I can treat the sandbag like a human being, right? In strongman sport, there is an efficient, good way to lift the sandbag. But if you just start learning just to lift it, and I believe that the biggest way to do this safely is by learning how to use the breath. Because I think that if you're holding your breath while doing this stuff, those are the only times I've ever tweaked myself. Now, as I've learned how to breathe while moving this thing, right, using the exhale as a way to create force, my body feels so safe because inherently I'm breathing, I feel safe. So now I have the ability to lift this thing in so many different ways and get it to my shoulder, get it over, that it's developing all this awkward strength that makes it easy to lift barbells. But it takes progression, right? So,
and what people have to understand is that tissue load tolerance and progression is the magic principle above everything else. It can be complicated. We get on a podcast, we hear sandbags, kettlebells, maces, barbells, bodyweight, all this stuff. The thing is, you've got to start at the bottom and progress up patiently. And regardless of how on the surface, how dangerous, awkward, unconventional an exercise looks, you can build up the capacity of your joints, tendons, ligaments, and muscles in order to actually be able to manage whatever you're doing. And we just have to look at social media to see this. I'm blown away every single time I'm on there with people doing crazy loads on a Jefferson curl, a bent over spine deadlift with thoracic, lumbar flexion to the max, people doing these awkward rotational movements with load, people like yourself and Seema just throwing essentially a human being above their head in their garage. And it's so uplifting as opposed to being scary. It opens our eyes to what we can actually do. It raises our standards of optimism for what we can achieve with our body. And I think that's something that if we approach our fitness journey with that kind of tenacity and belief in ourselves over time, that's powerful, man. It goes beyond the physical. for sure.
Absolutely. And, I'll get into the other equipment stuff, but from what you said right there, man, it kind of takes me back to when I first met Ben Patrick, and I'm so glad that I get to like work with him. I have some programs on his app in the martial arts section. And when I first saw his content, I was in a place where I had a lot of knee pain. Like I had Osgood-Schlatter. 2017, I had a meniscectomy. Part of my meniscus was removed now I can't even remember which knee, but I think it was my left knee. And I was at a point where like looking at Ben's stuff, and when I attempted an ATG split squat, it was so painful. Like when I attempted to do, the, what's the double knee movement down? Not Jefferson. What is it? Sissy squats. When I attempted sissy squats, so painful. And I was just like, what? This just isn't possible for me. But then I was like, whoa. Stop. Treat yourself like a bitch. So regress it, bro. Regress it. And when I regressed an ATG split squat to standing putting my foot on a higher surface, no weight, just moving slowly in and out of that range of motion, learning how to breathe. Because at that point, I still had the tendency of, when something felt uncomfortable, I would hold my breath. So learning how to breathe, so the system tells your system understands this is safe. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, I can take my knee into that range of motion and it doesn't hurt. And slowly over the weeks, I progressed to the ground, then I progressed to load, and then I can magically do it. I can magically now have deep knee flexion without pain. That's when that made me so happy, because I was like, I have the ability to do a deep knee bend again. Because I was in true belief that because of the surgeries I had, and because I had Osgood-Schlatter when I was younger, and because I wasn't playing soccer anymore, I'm just this jumping knee bending stuff, not for me. Now you can't stop me from doing that stuff. But we got to take that idea and that ability to progress into everything else we're looking at. Instead of thinking a Jefferson curl or a deep spine bend is bad for people, and I find it unfortunate that there are people who are not just inherently saying these movements aren't good for the spine. There are educators that are saying these movements are bad for the spine. Instead, how about we teach people how to regress these things? And Ben has done an amazing job of that. We teach people how to regress these things to their level, and then slowly progress, and then realize that you don't have to be Jefferson curling 225 pounds like Atlas Power Shrugged. You don't have to do that. Right?
Yeah.
But to get the ability back to have a deep spine bend and come back up and not feel excruciating amounts of pain, you want that ability.
This is where regressions, for anyone that's in the world of calisthenics, learns to embrace very early on. Because if you come from a weightlifting, generic gym background, you've got the movement and you just can essentially go into it every single time. You can do a bench press with a bar. It's the exact same, but adding more weight over time. If you want to gain something, say like a Nordic curl, I remember the first time that I saw this online, fully hip extended, upright, this badass beast just going all the way down, touching the chest on the ground, coming back up with their own control. I tried to do it the first time. I got maybe like 5-10 centimeters down, fell completely flat.
Same.
I'm like, okay, why is this? I've only ever done deadlifts before. I've never done any knee flexion related movement. So it makes sense that the Nordic curl will be challenging. So you got to humble yourself, and you're essentially just doing a hinge variation to start with. And then you move a bit further forward. Then you practice with some eccentrics, or maybe throw on a band as well. But the whole notion of regression is important for strength gain as well. Not just in the injury world. Of course, you got to build up that tissue tolerance, but strength just won't come from nowhere, especially these more complicated bodyweight movement that have so much to offer too.
The same thing happened with me with Nordics, by the way. I just want to mention that, because now people see that I'm good at Nordics, but I wasn't.
But you were always good at NSEMA. Surely you're just genetically gifted. You could just do it out of the womb.
Dude, that's why I like showing when I suck at something, because once I become pretty good, it's like you see the process. But dude, that's the important thing. It's maybe some people have a propensity to be a little bit better at something than others when they start. That is a thing, right? But generally, we're all going to be a beginner. And being a beginner, if we shift our perspective on being a beginner at something, it just means that we have room to grow. Because when you've done something for so long and you can't find any more paths of progression, that's depressing.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks, because it's like, what do I do? What do I venture? Like, it's great to be a beginner. It's an amazing experience. And that's why, like, for me, I try to find things that I can be a beginner at, because when I progress, it ends up like when I started doing the rope a few years back, right? I was hitting myself all the time. I actually thought it was kind of stupid at first, right? When I started doing the mace, I thought these things were kind of like, I was just like, okay. But I also was like, you know what? There's something here. And if I can become proficient, it'll teach me something. And it's totally adjusted the way I look at fitness. So inherently, be okay with being bad. Be okay with being a beginner. That's great, because when you become proficient and when you at some point reach a level of when you become an expert, and also at the same time, let's also not think that, like, being a real expert, like at the top, that truly takes a long time. You can become proficient, but proficiency to mastery is a totally different level.
Oh yeah, in terms of the time it takes to progress and the amount of effort per unit of gains. I'm sure you could speak to this in your powerlifting journey. When you were close to that 405 bench press, the amount of sacrifice you would have had to make to get that increment more. You were already at such a high point, but to get that bit more, you would have had to cut back on all your lower body stuff. Maybe you would have had to do a specialization phase. You would have had to dot your I's and cross your T's with nutrition, sleep, every single thing perfect, in the hope of getting that just minute percentage, which is, we're not being defeatist here. It's just the reality of becoming an expert to a world-class level. And if we look at this through the lens of fun and just becoming well-rounded, that's what's so cool about it, because you can progress in multiple domains with a moderate to high level of effort, but not an extreme amount of effort or an extreme amount of sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah. You could have used my deadlift there. You had to use, like, my never getting 405 bench. You had to do that to me.
It stood out to me. That's okay.
Stick it to freaking scab. Nah. You're totally right, man. It's to get to those levels, it takes a different level of focus. And I don't like using this word, but, like, it might take you potentially letting go of other things that you find interesting, right? Especially if you're trying to do it quickly. So you're totally right there, but be a beginner, allow yourself to suck at things and pick up new skills. And that's why, the rope that I learned from David Weck, learning that practice, was something that's been extremely fruitful, because you know what the flow state is, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Now, I think that the rope is powerful. I'll first speak about how it's powerful for me, but I'll speak about why I think it's powerful for many people. And then the mace too. But the rope is particularly powerful because it's a practice that can allow you to get rotational movement ability of your spine, that figure eight pattern of the spine, right? It's actually really cool that even Kelly Starrett was recently on Andrew Huberman and he brought up rope flow. And I was like, finally, it's starting to become a little bit more accepted by people. You know what I mean? And Kelly was talking about that natural figure eight of the movement of the spine that propels efficient locomotion. And when you learn how to use the rope, initially you're starting with your hands and your spine's a bit rigid, but over time you're going to learn how to integrate that figure eight movement of the spine with the feet, the weight shifting forwards and backwards in the feet, which is why a lot of people, when they start the practice, they're like, oh, I walk a bit smoother. There's this trainer we had on our podcast, CJ Kabliska. He mentioned this story on our show. He went and learned rope flow from David Weck maybe 4 years ago or so. 3 days, spent time learning it, went on a run, 10-minute PR. Why did he have a 10-minute PR? Efficient locomotion. On his run, instead of running like this, he now has this natural, bam! He just now has this natural weight shift that's propelling him forward while using less energy. Inherently gets a PR without running more. Efficient locomotion is huge for being a good moving human being. So for me, I was at a place when I started rope flow that I could get into flow states with jujitsu. At that point, I think I was already at it for 5-6 years. So I had this ability to, like, when you have a practice, especially when you have a physical practice that you can get into that flow state, you want to do that all the time. When a runner becomes proficient and efficient, they want to run all the time. When a grappler becomes proficient enough to get into a flow state while doing jujitsu, where jujitsu is now, for me, jujitsu is play most of the time. There are certain people that I can roll with that really, really push, but even so, it still feels fun, like play. Like I go to jujitsu and I get out and I'm like, I don't feel stressed. But that's where it can become dangerous, because when you get to that point where you can efficiently, every training session, get into a flow state with this thing, you do it more, you do it more, you do it more. And this is the thing, doing running too much, doing jujitsu too much, doing any movement practice potentially a little bit too much, because it allows you to achieve this state of no mind where you're not thinking anymore and you're just moving efficiently. It'll cause issues. So when I found rope flow and I became proficient and I was now able to just rotate and move and music's playing and I'm just breathing and flowing and I'm getting all this natural movement in, I was like, oh, I don't have to do jujitsu as much. Because I truly, I realized, like, I can just, when my body knows it needs a break, because in the past, like, my body would be telling me, Nsima, stop, just take a break today. Don't go to jujitsu, sit down, recover, do something else. But in my mind, I'm like, well, I want jujitsu. It gives me that state. It gives me that you're not in your head anymore. That's what the rope can give you, along with propelling your ability to move better. You're getting this rotation of the spine that you're not getting in the gym. You're getting this movement symmetry. There are patterns where you can throw on the right, you could throw on the left. You can rotate on the right, you can rotate on the left. And inherently, becoming a better rotator on both sides of the body is going to help you to become a better martial artist. You know, there are people I know that notice that they punch better because they're rotating better from side to side. So I noticed that this fed into my movement ability as a human and a grappler, but it also gave me a reliable practice that after becoming proficient enough, I could always achieve a flow state. So I always reliably feel better, decompressed after doing the rope than when I started. And it's a physical activity that feeds my recovery, not something that takes away from my recovery. So in doing it, I get some mental benefits. I get movement and rotational benefits, rotation of the wrist, shoulders, spine, integration of the body. But then I'm also able to get a nice level of recovery too. So that's why I've become obsessed with showing it to people, because I'm like, this is one of those things that I play with it. I play with it. When I go to jujitsu, for me personally, jujitsu feels like play. The rope feels like play. When I work with a mace and flow with a mace, now it feels like play, right? I can't compare anything else to it.
The spine training benefits that you get are so profound, even beyond just the physical movement capacity in all directions. It's how you feel day to day. Let's just picture someone that's depressed, anxious. What's their posture look like? They're hunched over, kyphotic, compressed like this. You open up through the spine, it changes your mental state instantly. Just being able to stand taller, what that does for breathing. And then it's almost this positive feedback loop where you feel better because you're more open through the spine, and you're more open through the spine because you feel better, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the big thing is, like, I think one big thing is consistent breathing, right? A physical practice that allows you to locomote through space and rotate while always breathing. An initial tendency for a lot of people is they start, and when they're doing a movement and they're struggling, hold their breath. That's why in the videos that I show in the foundations, almost every video in the beginning, I'm like, breathe, 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 breathe. Because when you're doing something different, you have this tendency of, you don't understand, so you hold your breath to try to focus, but that holding of the breath is making your body move worse. So you train your ability to move while breathing. You also improve your ability to breathe through the diaphragm, right?
Do you think you become a bit more subconscious when you're breathing as well? You naturally finding the way to move?
Yes. The rope hitting you is a great feedback, because the rope hitting you is a sign that you're not rotating well, right? So you're getting not just the feedback from the rope, but also you'll realize when you're doing something, you're holding your breath, you get hit, and then you remember, oh, I was holding my breath and I wasn't allowing myself to fluidly move. Right? So yes, you're able to get more into that subconscious. And again, at some point, when you're a beginner at this stuff, you're going to suck. It's not going to feel natural. You're going to do the simple underhand pattern and it will feel totally weird. You're just going to be you'll be like, oh, the rope's hitting you. You'll feel stupid. But everyone feels stupid. It took me a while to know the difference between an overhand and an underhand pattern. That's everyone's experience. But the thing I think is a little bit of practice. Doesn't need to be a workout. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, just sprinkle it into your day. Do it in the morning, you just sprinkle it into your day as a movement snack, as a break. We call it microdosing. That's where the money is. Don't put stress on yourself in this practice. Treat it like a break. Like you're going for a walk, take your rope on your walk, rotate a little bit, walk. Treat it like a break. It's supposed to be something that makes you feel better. It's not supposed to be something that stresses you out, right? But you progress at that. And again, I think the big power comes with a good level of proficiency. You learn a lot. Like there are so many immediate benefits that I still get surprised seeing people like, wow, I'm balancing better from day to day. I find that I move more fluidly. I find that I don't have as much, I'm having less back pain now. And those things are close to immediate for a lot of people. But I think the magic comes when you've been doing this a little bit each day consistently for 6 months, a year, 2 years, because that flow state, man, that flow state feels like nothing else. You're not in your mind anymore. You're not thinking about your day. You're in your body. You're moving your body. You're not thinking about your movement. You're just flowing. Flow state is artists get into flow state with music. Sometimes people get into flow states with certain types of work, but so much during the day, we have our mind racing, thinking of different things as we're working on things. And we don't have something that can reliably turn our mind off and allow us to move. For a lot of people, that is put forward with maybe, watching TV. We barely ever walk without listening to something. So our focus is still on something, because you can get into flow state if you go into nature, but no one's doing that anymore, right? But now you have this thing that can just allow you to move and rotate. And when you become proficient, you close your eyes and let's say you have some calm music, but you're just moving. That is a level of freedom and play that I just hope that people allow themselves to experience. Yeah. And it can, again, you might experience this with running. I experience this in martial arts, but physical flow states, man, are something else. There's something else.
One for me that gets flow state happening is handstands, hand balancing.
Okay.
When you get to a decent level of this, it's not challenging. A beginner might look at a handstand and think, oh, it's so hard. You got to push. They're holding their breath. They're thinking about what's my wrist, elbows, shoulders, what's everything doing? Mm-hmm. Once you become a certain level of proficiency in a handstand, you're just there. You're focusing on your breathing. You may be scanning different parts of your body. But combining that with a metronome is just amazing, because we're doing, as you get more advanced, you can do transitions onto one hand. You just hear that clock ticking, tick, 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 switch, tick, tick, tick. You're not counting per se, but the metronome is just putting you in that trance-like state. We look at any of those tribal cultures, music is such a key part, and having that type of beat, you can instigate that yourself with a metronome in a lower intensity type of physical activity.
When did you start implementing the metronome and why?
Oh, years ago, probably after a few years of doing handstands. Mm-hmm. And the metronome was put in because I was being too conscious about, in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as you get tired, that becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the metronome just allows me to focus on being present.
Okay. Because I'm so happy you mentioned the metronome. I use the metronome a lot of times when I train with because I'll sometimes have a rope, a sandbag, a bell, and some of these things, and I'll just kind of have a metronome playing sometimes. And I found that it allows me to sync my movement with my breath. It just kind of gives me an outside cue, and it gives me this, right? So I'll sometimes sync the way I lift a sandbag to that metronome, and it can reliably help me to achieve a level of flow now while lifting, because that was something that that's something that I've been seeking for a long time. Like I found Royal Flow through David Weck, and I'm so happy that I learned from David, and I'm continuing to learn from David. That guy's a mad genius. You gotta talk to him, man. He's a crazy guy, but the best kind of crazy.
Eccentric and fitness are quite a common concoction.
But yeah. David, man, I've learned. I'm so thankful for him, honestly, and that I've crossed paths with him. And I'm so thankful for so many people, but especially David, because so many concepts he's brought into my mind, and I've been able to apply and reap benefit. And I've been able to take those concepts and experiment and find different things that have had a massive effect even in the way that I work as a martial artist, that have truly moved my jiu-jitsu forward. But I was going to flow through movement with like the metronome. One aspect of lifting in the past that really was a bit of a struggle for me, especially after being able to flow in jiu-jitsu, was just how disjointed lifting and training felt. I've just wanted to find a way to make training feel more fluid. And I'm not saying that training needs to be that way all the time. That's not what I'm saying. But for me personally, a goal has been to like get the results that I would be able to get in the weight room, but in a more fluid fashion that just felt that would allow me to flow, right? And having a metronome in the background is something that's been helpful, because like I'll use the rope and I'll follow that beat. I'll pick up a sandbag. I'll do a few movements with that. Then I might move with the mace. Then I might move with the kettlebell to that rhythm. And that rhythmic movement, where then I can start getting to a place where I'm not thinking about the movement anymore. I'm just doing the movement for not for reps either, just moving. And I could do it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, then switch to something else. I'm getting the stimulus. I'm working the breath. I'm getting the movement, but I'm also in a flow. And I'm still improving at the way I do these things, but that's been the thing that is kind of that's been my focus, because I love training, but this allows me to love it even more.
On that topic of microdosing movement, this is something that I'm really passionate about myself as well, because if we're all honest, we want to move better. It's just we don't want to sacrifice the effort and the time to do so. Because when I first had an arbitrary goal of moving better, I thought I'd need to do a specific dedicated workout every single time in order to get that goal. And motivation wanes. If you're lifting or doing resistance training once a day, and then you've got tacked on, say, 4 or 5 days a week to do a full mobility workout, people fall off. I fell off. What helps me get motivated, because the barrier to entry is so low, is this microdosing movement concept. And a few of the things that I've formed as a fitness habit, as quirky as it might seem to the average Joe. Example, I want to improve my squat. I have to spend time in the squat. I'm not just going to go and do a workout. What am I going to do every day? I'm going to chill out after work. I'm going to watch some TV. I've got some squat wedges near my couch. Slide those out. Before you know it, I'm spending minimum 15 minutes squatting. Then I go on the couch and chill with my girl, and so be it. She's used to it. Hanging throughout the day. I'm fortunate I got a pull-up bar set downstairs on the way to the toilet. Go and hang. Accumulate 5 minutes a day easily. But if you were to tell me, Daniel, you've got to spend 15 minutes in a squat as part of a workout, and you have to also hang for 5 minutes, I'd lose motivation for that.
Dog, we're twins pretty much. Like I got a pull-up bar on the garage door. I got a pull-up bar upstairs on the door up there. I got a parallettes downstairs. I have the dip bars in the living room. I have a rice bucket in front of the TV along with a hunkering stool, and I have a sandbag there too. And I have a kettlebell in the house. We also keep stuff here too. And the reason is because I've set up my environment to serve my movement ability, right? Having these things around, you could just ignore them, of course, but you're going to come to a point where you're just like, you know what? I put this stuff here because I want to build a habit of movement. And over time, outside of the workout you do, you're getting in all of this different movement that truly does add up. And I think that it does lead to the goal of uninhibited movement, because you'll walk by that sandbag and you'll lift it. And a few days you might be like, okay, sis. But over time, you're just going to look at that thing and lift it and put it over your shoulder. No thing, right? You don't even think about it. You walk underneath that doorway and you just hop up and boom, 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 right? That has been, I think, the biggest lever of my progress. And I think that is the biggest lever for a vast majority of people. Because, we're fortunate in the sense that fitness is our obsession. These are the things that we want to share with people. We want to share with people because we want to help them. But that in of itself makes it an obsession for us. Not everyone's obsession is fitness, but everyone does have a responsibility to their body. Because even if your obsession isn't being the fittest person, at the end of the day, you have a body and you want to feel good in it. You have a body and you want to feel strong. You want to feel able. You want to have the abilities to do everything you want to do. So even if fitness isn't your obsession, it probably is in your best interest to set your environment up for your health and your fitness. Because we're all human beings. This is something important for all of us. It's not just important for me or you because it's become our mission. It's important for everyone because we all want to live vital, virile lives. So, I think even Kelly Starrett years ago, he talked about the 10-minute squat, just getting people to sit in a squat. And that's why I think, of course, having some equipment around, like if you're even in an office, you could have a kettlebell, a slant board, you could have a rope, you could take a light rope on a walk and rotate on a walk. You could do all these things without having to step into a gym to work out, although there's no problem with stepping in a gym to work out, but you can sprinkle these things into your day. I have this thing and you'll see, if people watch this podcast, they'll see me in the background with my hands down and they're probably like, what's Nsima doing there?
Nsima is making gains on his body while he's making gains on the podcast, guys. So anyone can do it at any time.
I got to fix these baby wrists, dog. Seriously, no. If we ever meet in person, my wrists are abnormally small for my size. I have really large ankles and really tiny wrists. This has been one of the banes of my existence at progressing things like handstands because every time
for bodybuilding, it's an asset because you just, that joint is just making those forearms look juicy.
Yeah. It makes the forearms look juicy. But then when I'm grappling with someone and they grab my wrist, I'm like, it's not good. That's why I'm always working on making these things stronger. And they're making gains, right? Because I'm microdosing. But at the same time, but back to the microdosing thing. That is, I think, where most people can, have some big, big benefits. And two things. Kids. I talked about this in a recent video, but I think paying attention to the way kids do things should inform us as adults, because for some reason we grow out of these things, and not even for some reason, because when you were a kid skipping around or when you were a kid jumping on something, your parents told you to stop and calm down. And over time, you stopped doing these things that your body felt it needed to do. So you don't just go and you skip anymore. You walk in a certain way. You don't jump on things anymore. You maturely step up slowly. But
you don't go on the floor, crawl, locomote, none of that.
The floor, dude. The floor is something that I use the floor so much, and it's powerful for people. But of course, you can regress yourself to the floor. So instead of normal couches, have things that are a little bit closer to the floor that will allow you to build a relationship with it again. There's a guy that we had on our podcast, Kador Ziani, and he has this thing that he calls the 7 postures. Kador is like 50-something years old, still dunking a basketball. Amazing mobility of all of his joints, from the foot, the knees, the ankles. But the floor is what he uses to build his natural mobility. But the thing is, it takes time to build that relationship to the floor. So having like a sandbag that you can sit on, I use this thing called a hunkering stool. Having these things that get you closer to the ground and then at some point to the ground is going to make it easy for you to just naturally get up and get down to the ground easily. Because as you get older, people become worse at that. They don't even touch the ground unless they fall and then fracture and then slowly whittle away and die. But kids, what are kids doing? They're on the floor, they're on the couch, they're jumping around, they're skipping, they're hopping, they're sprinting without warming up. We can do these things as adults. We just need to regress these abilities for ourselves, give ourselves time. I think soft tissue is extremely important. So over time, get your soft tissue more pliable and supple, because kids, they are more pliable and supple. That's something you lose as an adult, but you can get back. You develop these attributes again, you're going to start moving like a kid again. Like so happy that at 32, I'm better than my early 20s. And I'm continuing to improve because of the lens of which I look at things, right? We could learn a lot from kids, man.
On movement quality and the soft tissue side of things, myofascial release, it's a bit of a contentious topic in terms of does it work? How does it work? I know that you're a proponent of it to move better. What's your reason for that?
Experience I've had, experience the people that have actually done it for periods of time and have seen its benefits. So I learned about myofascial release from Kelly Starrett's Supple Leopard in 2013. That's when I bought his book. And I do myofascial release. And when I started doing it, by the way, what would happen to me when I would do it is I would hold my breath, I would tighten up, I'd get some relief, but I never kept it as a consistent thing. Something would happen, I'd do some myofascial release, I'd recover, I'd stop doing myofascial release. But then as I realized, like, you know what, let's try to make this a true habit, right? Because, I'd have lower back pain years ago, and I would smash my glute medius and I'd have a release and tension of the lower back. And sometimes it would just totally go away. And I'd be like, ugh. And then it would come back and maybe I'd smash my glute medius and it wouldn't go away. I'm like, okay, why isn't this working? But then as I started doing myofascial release everywhere, I realized the global impact it had on my ability to move. Let me first say this. Everything that I've talked to you guys about today is a skill. I mentioned that I was holding my breath when I first started doing myofascial release, because if you hold your breath and tense your tissues as you're doing myofascial release, it's not going to be as effective. Because when you are bringing pressure to tissues and you're tense, you're not able to get as deep into that tissue because your body is not happy with that pressure. So it's tensing up so you can't get as deep. So you might get some relief. But if you get better at the ability of bringing pressure to a tissue, calming your body down, breathing into the diaphragm, becoming parasympathetic, allowing yourself to get deeper into those tissues, relaxing your face, so not smashing tissues and relaxing your face and relaxing your body, you're going to be able to get more out of that myofascial release. Because what I found is when I bring pressure to tissues and I'm able to relax, what happens is when you relieve that pressure, nutrients, blood, etc., goes into those tissues. So ideally, you want to breathe, bring pressure, relax. A few ways I've found it to be extremely beneficial, and in just practical application, is attacking the glute med here and there. I hit everywhere. I use you've seen it in my content, the body lever. I love that thing. It's made by this guy Steve Terry, mad genius. Also, the funny thing is he gave me a body lever in 2020, and I didn't touch it until last year, where he sent me a message, and then I pulled it out behind the couch. I started using it. I was like, my God, it's better than all the other tools I've used, because it allows you to pressurize those tissues using the power of leverage. Now, what I was saying before, to remember my train of thought, I'm trying to remember where I was.
With the soft tissue stuff, and Seema, how much pressure from a pain scale out of 10 and duration are you roughly doing for each part of your body?
Okay, yeah, that's where I was getting with it. So this is the thing. You first off, the pain tolerance is putting as much pressure as you're able to tolerate while breathing and staying calm. So you're not trying to induce pain. You're not trying to put as much pressure as you can possibly put into tissues. Just like you shouldn't just like I don't lift if I'm holding my breath. If I find that as I'm digging into this tissue, I am seizing up and holding my breath, don't dig in that hard. That's actually going to probably be you're going to probably hurt yourself. You dig in and you breathe, you relax, you use your breath as a metric for I'm safe, so that you can get deeper into those tissues. But a few things, a few instances where I've just realized, like, wow, okay, this is money. Ian Danny, who is such an amazing strength coach, Sydney McLaughlin, he works with her as her strength coach. He does myofascial release for all of his athletes that he works with. Sydney McLaughlin's the 400-meter world record at the Olympics this past Olympics, right? Ian Danny came. I had an issue in my wrist. He looked at my hand. He was like, have you been hitting your forearm with myofascial release? And I went, oh my God, No, I haven't. I haven't been hitting my forearm. I've been focusing on the wrist. With all the things that I've been doing within jiu-jitsu, the pulling, the pushing, and the lifting that I do, these tissues they're not supple. They don't slide and glide well. Okay. I brought pressure and I bring pressure to these tissues. I move it. Here's an example. Okay. If you guys don't have video, I'm sorry. Can't explain it.
Wow. So basically, Nsima's holding what appears to be two jumbo-sized nunchucks that look like they would be a torture device in any horror movie.
Yeah. So I have this around my forearm. I smash, find tissue, roll, breathe, pause, move the wrist around, because now under pressure, those tissues in my forearm are getting worked. I rotate, find that point, breathe, move around.
It's good you're using the power of leverage, so you're not using a ton of muscular effort to impose that soft tissue work.
I'm just laying pressure in my body. I'm not squeezing down. I'm just putting the leverage of my body into this. Move that tissue around, right? I find and nowadays, globally with my body, all my tissues are supple. You can put as much pressure as you want to any part of my body. I'm not going to feel pain. But through training every week, there's still areas where I'll hit and I'll be like, okay, this tissue quality isn't as good as this other area where I feel no discomfort. So over time, you learn, you become your own body worker, because a body worker, a massage therapist, very experienced ones, like my friend Chris Kadowski, we've had on this show, he can go touch somebody's tissues and be like, ooh, this isn't nice. Because the tissue quality of that area isn't as supple and as pliable as like right above or right below it. So he can slowly work on these areas that this individual is holding excess tension, right? I've learned to do that for myself. I've learned to explore my body with an Amazon med
ball classic.
I've learned to explore and find areas that just don't feel as good as the areas that feel great.
The takeaway for people with respect to soft tissue work, myofascial release, is that the arguments are made based on why it's working. In the science community, there's people saying that it completely changes the tissue itself when you apply pressure. But there's been research showing that you'd need a machine level of force to change the tissue quality of an ITB. So I think the issue there is it's working. We don't really know why it's working, but it appears that the combination of soft tissue work immediately followed by movement the recipe. There's the reaction. It's not one or the other. It's the combination of both. Because if you only do soft tissue work, myofascial release, then you sit on the couch, you're going to get transient acute changes that dissipate. Mm-hmm. Whereas if by you doing the mechanical pressure to all those tissues that are giving you some pain or causing some stiffness in the surrounding joints, and then you move, and it allows you to move with less pain through more range of motion, bit by bit, you're going to actualize the ability to move freely with that.
Yes. That's what happens. You don't just like do this stuff and not move. You do this stuff, you move with the new lack of tension that you have in these areas, the new range that you now have with this movement. That's why in Kelly Starrett's book, whenever he talks about myofascial release, he always says the test and the retest. What does the retest do? The retest allows you to move with the new tissue quality, right? And there's so many other things that happen as you develop this skill, because myofascial release, if you do it on yourself, the benefits you get as you do it over and over time are going to improve because your awareness of your body improves. You will at some point be able to feel something and be like, that's my quadratus lumborum, and maybe I need to bring some pressure to somehow need to get some pressure over here. And you'll be able to relieve that. I want to tell you a story. I started doing a lot of kicking recently because one thing that I realized is the rope allows you to kind of swing and kind of loosen up these upper body portions. But I wasn't doing anything to kind of throw my lower body outside of sprinting. So I put a heavy bag in my garage and I started doing some kicking, and I played soccer. So inherently I know how to throw power into a kick. A week goes in, and actually not even a week, maybe 5 days in, I try to go to sleep and I feel this tightness that feels like deep into my core, into my hip flexor. And it's like my sleep quality was shit because I just felt this burning sensation of these tissues throughout my core. I was like, God, what's going on here? This is. So I hit my rectus femoris with a med ball and I moved around. There was there wasn't relief here. There was like a level of relief in my rec fem, right? But there was no relief in these tissues that were just going crazy. So I took this thing and I put it around my QL. I started squeezing both sides of my torso and then breathing into it. So there's pressure right here in my QLs. And then I breathe into that pressure that I'm leveraging and creating. I did that. Weekly, I do a gut smash anyway. So then I would squeeze here, breathe into these tissues. I worked my way down, worked my way up, moved around. It went away. There was no pain anymore. Now, why was I having this level of like just, it wasn't a pain you could click. It's almost like I just felt so much activity that I couldn't turn off. It's because I brought in this new stimulus of powerful kicks that with the psoas, the hip flexor, the QLs involved to like kick that leg, these tissues were getting a stimulus that they made, not even during soccer, because I wasn't kicking that way during soccer, but they're getting this stimulus that they haven't had in a long time, if ever. So now these tissues are just going, they're just on. Doing that, bringing pressure, allowing myself to breathe and relax, it's like it just kind of helped those tissues relax. When Ian helped me work on my forearm and I realized I was getting these tissues to relax so that now they're supple, they can slide, glide, and move. And let's think about that. I hate it when people come onto this podcast and say, according to the research, myofascial release does nothing, because I'm just like, the countless people that are getting benefit from this every day, the absolute benefit that I'm getting from this as an athlete, I'm not a fucking, I'm sorry, I shouldn't curse. I'm sorry. Let me rewind. I'm not a scientist who's doing research and all of that, but I am someone who's putting my body through rigors that you as the scientist do not understand. And this is absolutely playing a benefit. I know many other athletes who are doing the same thing. And you're going to say it's placebo? Just because you can't explain the function of what's going on, you're going to say it's placebo and it's not going to have an effect. Because when a scientist says that to somebody, or somebody that puts himself forward as a scientist, everyone believes it is fact. Unfortunately, these people aren't putting things into practice. And when they look at research, they're looking at the average. And when they don't have something that they can research reliably, up until that point, it's just going to be pure conjecture and hypothesis. So for the rest of us who have to put things into action and you do things that work for us, we need to be our own N of one. We have to look at ourselves as our own experiment. I love scientists and I love research, but they're telling us things that we've probably known for a while. Progressive overload. Milo of Croton lifted a calf daily as he aged and got older, and he got stronger. Progressive overload, right? Like a lot of these things that are being proven have been done by people in action, and then they're proven to be relevant. But we have to do things that science doesn't prove yet, based off of anecdotes, and we need to see how it works for us. If you do myofascial release and you give it a good shot and it doesn't work for you at all, it brings you no level of relief, discard it. Discard it. But if you do it for a while, you see that it's bringing benefit, you improve at the skill, because again, like I mentioned, the breathing, the calming down, this is a skill. It becomes more effective the more you're able to calm down to pressure. This is why all of my tissues are supple. And this is why in my videos where I mention, because I'm never going to stop talking about myofascial release and its relation to movement, because of how much I've seen it affect me and people that are close to me, like Mark Bell. Like Mark, there was a time that he wasn't doing as much myofascial release, but Mark realized as he started doing it more and more, he was like, oh, I'm running better. I'm being able to have these movement abilities that I wasn't having before. And it's not just because I'm doing these movement abilities. Like me and him, man, we do so much together. Like he'll do myofascial release and he'll text me like, dude, I was having this, I did some MFR, it went away. Or we'll come in the morning, I'll be like, Mark, dude, that thing I was having, I did some MFR and it just went away. And we're like, this is magic. Oh, but that's the thing. It's like, we're doing it. We're not waiting for research. We're putting it into practice. And I was going to mention nowadays, I have supple tissues everywhere and I know how to heal my body. I think that body workers and massage therapists are great. I've had some that were like, you can't do it all on your own. You do need somebody. But I think that at a certain point, I think it's your responsibility to take care of your body's tissues. It's you can hire somebody to do it all the time for you, and it does take time to learn it on your own and become more proficient. But it is your job to take care of yourself. And I've become proficient at this because I can't afford to not be able to deal with the stresses that happen to my body because I'm putting my body under so much stress.
And Seema, I appreciate your insights into different forms of fitness. Where can people find out more about your stuff?
Yeah. So obviously I have my YouTube channel, Nsima Inyang. The community is called The Stronger Human on School. And there's also a website that you can get there, The Stronger Human Store. Then there's also the Mark Bell's Power Project, where we have so many people on that we talk with and learn from all the time. Have a lot of episodes there. So yeah, but it's fun and I feel blessed that I get to do this and learn and share. So I'm happy. And thank you, man. I appreciate you bringing me on. This is awesome. I need your help in handstands. I'll tell you that. These weak baby bitch wrists need some help. So yeah.
I got you covered, bro.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Yep.